Hi, welcome back to the NFXL podcast with myself, Andy XL. Now, in week 6, I've split my weekly good week, bad week feature into two parts. In part 1, I covered off the guys that had won in week 6 and therefore had a good week. But I've also expanded this feature this week out to be a bit of a review of the season so far, as we're a third of the way through the regular season now. So in part 2, I'm going to look at the teams that didn't get a win in week 6 and for therefore it was a bad week. Excuse me, I'm struggling with a cold and bug of some sort. Right, let's start with the Philadelphia Eagles. If you were the team that was on the end of the biggest upset in any given week, then by definition, you have had a pretty big week. And that team this week are the Eagles. In losing to the Giants, the Eagles lost the share of the top seed in the NFC and also um, opened the door to the others in that division. So that could have been a terrible week for him, but the blow of this loss was softened by both the Commanders and Cowboys losing in week 6 as well. This loss follows their fourth quarter, the Eagles' loss follows their fourth quarter capitulation to the Broncos in week 5, and so makes it 2 bad weeks in a row. And worse than that, um, there are greater underlying concerns for the Eagles to find answers to and quickly. The offense has not fired at all this season and looks to be a shadow of the offense the Eagles had last season, even though the personnel haven't really changed very much. The defense can point at injuries across the D line and in their secondary, but they have lost personnel in that area, key personnel in that area, notably on the D line, since last season. So it's not a surprise if this unit is not as powerful as last season. So the offense really need to find their mojo if the Eagles are to get back to championship winning form. They travel to Minnesota in week 7, then have a shot at revenge against the Giants in week 8 before their bye in week 9. They still have a strong chance of making the postseason, and if they can get their act together by then, could be a tough nut to crack in January. But a third loss in a row in week 7 would put pressure on them to beat the Giants in week 9. Now, I have to say, it's just a growing feeling, not an instinctive feeling, that the Eagles are playing like a team that are jaded after their success from last season. And I think there's psychological stuff going on here. It's just been the toll of that achievement may be beginning to show. Now, they may come through that, but right now, that looks to be how they're playing. Right. Excuse me. Like I say, this cold's really battering me at the moment. Right. Washington Commanders have just said they lost as well. Now, the worrying thing about their loss is twofold. The Commanders pretty much had this one in the bag, holding an 8 point lead with less than a quarter to go. They conceded a long touchdown and made mistakes to allow the Bears to kick a late winning field goal. They came into the game knowing the Eagles and Cowboys had left the door open for them too, which is the second part of this, to make it so it could have been a great week for them. But they failed to walk through that door. But even worse, they were taking the final steps when they tripped and fell. That is not something teams ready for success do. Daniels had plenty of good, including 3 touchdown passes and some flashes on the ground, but his interception in the red zone was pretty bad, and his late fumble on a handoff was downright ugly. Having missed this great opportunity, the question is, will they get another one like it? And can they learn from their mistakes in week 6 to take it? Games at the Cowboys and Chiefs in the next 2 weeks now look pivotal for the Commanders' postseason hopes. Their season could go one way or other in the next 2 weeks, is what I'm saying, because they're both key games now against strong, opponents they need to beat, basically, if they're to justify themselves as challengers. Right, Buffalo Bills. They lost to the Falcons. There's one I called right this week. That emphasised all of their weaknesses. Firstly, that teams can run against them at will, which is why I thought the Falcons would beat them. And this was emphasised that they were depleted on their D line and were up against Bijan Robinson. But this issue is a massive concern for the Bills going forward and one they have to solve. Secondly, they're way too reliant on Josh Allen. It's a bit like Justin Herbert used to be for the Chargers now with Allen and Buffalo. And thirdly, they do not have a plan B if the opposing D line and pass rush gets to Allen. However, a bit like the Eagles, they're still 4-2. They have a share of their divisional lead and are in a wildcard spot. But if they want to be seen as an AFC team that can stand up to the might of the NFC, then they need to sort these issues out soon. They are at a revitalised Panthers in week 8 after their bye week, and then host the Chiefs to take them to the midpoint of the regular season. They need to be at least 5-3 after week 9 to go into the second half of the season in decent shape. Now, right, if we're saying bad weeks, bad year, bad every week. New York Jets. The Jets are now 0-6 and 4 games out of a wild card spot in the AFC. So the season is over for them already. And whilst the defense played well against the Broncos in London last week, and boy was that ugly to watch. Oh, what a game! Who stayed switched on all the way through that? Well done. The offense, like I say, the defense played well, but the offense were like a bunch of tourists on vacation. I think Justin Fields was still admiring the architecture, judging by how long he kept hold of the ball in this game. This was a dire performance, and from here on in, it is about the Jets evaluating their roster and making plans for next season. Right, Dallas Cowboys. Now, some were beginning to believe in the Cowboys. I never have in terms of this season, as any team with this sort of defence is going nowhere beyond week 18. On paper, all is not lost given the Eagles' loss this week, but they still trail the Eagles and Commanders in the NFC East and are 13th in the conference standings. They host those Commanders in week 7, and that is certainly a must win for them following this week 6 loss. Even if they do, they will then face a tough road game in Denver. They need to win both of those games to get back into a decent position in their division and wildcard races. Can't read my own script sometimes, I'm terrible. Jacksonville Jaguars. In losing at home to the Seahawks in week 6, the win over the Chiefs in week 5 now loses a lot of its value, as this team has shown it is not ready to put a string of wins together, and ultimately that is what is needed should you make the postseason. This loss puts them again back of the Colts in the AFC South, although they still lead the AFC wildcard race. But with the likes of the Chiefs, the rapidly improving Patriots, and the Broncos, with their strong D just behind them, they do not have a lot of room for mistakes right now. Now they head to their second home, London, to face the Rams before they go on bye in week 8. A loss in London may see them fall out of a wildcard spot, so the Jags need to win in week 7 to stay on track for the postseason, and really they remain unconvincing. It's a bad week for the Detroit Lions. Now, there really should be no disgrace in losing to Mahomes and the Chiefs, and this loss surely does not put the Lions' postseason participation in doubt. And there are mitigating circumstances to this loss, as the Lions fielded a battered and depleted secondary in this game, and Brian Branch's behaviour after the game won't help their cause either. But the offense spluttered in this one, and that is potentially a bigger concern come the postseason, as it raises the old question about these Lions, which is, are they good enough to take down a series of good teams at or near their best come the postseason? That is what the postseason is a true measure of. Now, maybe with a healthier secondary, the Lions may have the answers to those questions. But as with all teams yet to win titles, until they do, the questions remain out there. Having lost their divisional lead, home games against the Bucks and Vikings either side of their bye become big for them if they're to push for their case for the top seed in the NFC, which could be huge given how tough that conference is. Right, more coffee, keep myself going. What a Trojan, eh? Right, the Tennessee Titans. Having been given their first win of the season by the Cardinals in week 5, the Titans never looked like beating the Raiders in week 6. They're now 4 games behind the Colts in the AFC South and 3 back in the AFC wildcard race, lying 15th in the conference standings, and they're playing badly. So it's essentially back to the drawing board for the Titans. Like the Jets, what's good and what's not ahead of the 2026 season are the questions they need to find answers to avoid a similar fate next season. So they could be trade bait for sure. Right. New Orleans Saints. Another week, another loss. Again, their own errors cost the Saints in a game they definitely had a shot to win. That is good news in the sense that they are good enough to win games, but they now need to spend the rest of this season figuring out how to eliminate those errors and turn close losses into wins. Then they now fall 4 games back of the Bucks in their division and 3 games out of the wild card and last in the conference standings. So they're in the same position regarding this season as the Titans and the Jets for that matter. But they appear to be closer to finding the answers than either of those two. Can they find one win or more from games at the Bears, at home to the Bucks, and at the Rams to send them into the second half of the season um, with some sort of smile on their face? The Bears game looks to be the best hope of doing so, so that Week 7 game becomes big in that sense. Right. I will wash my hands after this. It's terrible. Right, AFC North, 3 teams all in one bundle here. Cincinnati Bengals, Cleveland Browns and the Baltimore Ravens. They're all lost in week 6 and are currently allowing the Steelers to just gently stroll away with the divisional title. The Browns are stuck with a feeble offense and are firmly in the evaluation stage regarding their offensive personnel. The defense has showed how good it can be, but is getting more and more worn down and demoralised as each win goes by. The Bengals put up a decent showing in Green Bay, having taken Joe Flacco from the Browns. He seemed to be finding his feet as this game progressed, so that gives them a faint flicker of hope going forward. The Ravens need Lamar Jackson back and quick. With him and a result or two, the Ravens could yet make a run for the divisional title and wildcard spots. But the time is pretty much now for the Bengals and Ravens to start winning, or they will leave themselves with too much ground to make up. We're already talking about 7-2, 8-3 runs that they need. The Bengals have a 3-game homestand upcoming against the Steelers, Jets, and Bears. The first is huge against the Steelers, but a minimum of 2 wins for the next 2 has to be a requirement. Really, they need all 3 from where they stand right now. The Ravens are on bye this week. Then they host the Bears before a road game in Miami. With just 1 win on the board, they also need to win those 2 coming off their bye to get back into contention. Right. Arizona Cardinals. Without Kyler Murray, Jacoby Brissett played pretty well here, but he has the same issues as Murray does essentially. When pressured, he's not as he tends to fall apart a bit, and he's not as mobile as Murray either. They also lost Marvin Harrison Jr. to concussion in this game, and the loss of this game drops them 2 games behind the other 3 teams in the NFC West. So the division title is now looking a long reach for them from here. They are also 14th in the NFC standings. So failure to win their next couple of games could lead to teams wanting to acquire their better players in trades and the Cardinals having to listen to their offers as part of a rebuild. That trade deadline becomes significant time-wise for teams that start to struggle at this point of the season. They host the Packers before a bye week. So in terms of the above, they need to beat the Packers in week 7 for more than one reason. The San Francisco 49ers. I didn't think the 49ers could get away with a depleted offense 2 weeks in a row, and that proved to be the case against the Bucks, despite another amazing showing from Kendrick Bourne. No disaster losing in Tampa, though. They remain top of their division with wins against the Rams and Seahawks to their name for tiebreak purposes. The Falcons at home, followed by the Texans and Giants on the road, are up next for San Fran. They will get players back in all likelihood in the next week or 2. So 2 wins from these 3 will likely keep them well on course for a divisional title chance and the postseason. Right, the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins could easily have won this week, and it took a spectacular escapology act from Justin Herbert to thwart them. But there is another unpalatable truth that's becoming more and more obvious for the Dolphins. Tua is costing them more games than he is winning for them. Problem is, they've given him a big contract through 2028. They do not have an out. They do have an out after 2026, but would still be hit with just shy of a 35 million cap hit even then. So they're in a much lesser version of the Deshaun Watson situation, or it's beginning to look that way, lumbered with a high-paid quarterback. He has thrown 7 picks in 6 games this season and 28 in his last 34 starts. 12 of those games were multi-pick games, and due to his concussion history, rushes for fewer than 5 yards a game and without a touchdown across the last 4 seasons on the ground. So they have 1 win to their name and not going to win the division this season. Are 3 games back in the wildcard race and look to have a lame duck at quarterback. That not only means they're done for this season, but probably next season too. Start a major rebuild is all I can suggest as any form of hope for the Dolphins. But they played well in week 6. They just didn't get over the line. Played well, but Tua didn't help them again. I mean to pick on him, but sometimes the truth hurts. Right, Houston Texans. The Texans come out their bye week half a game worse off against the Colts in the AFC South, trading them by 2.5 games now. Wins for the Patriots, Broncos, and Chiefs, also leaving them a game and a half out of the wildcard spots after week 6. Mainly tough games in Seattle at home to the 49ers need winning for them to keep the wildcard spots and the Colts in range of the Texans. So this was far from a good bye week for them. They must have been sitting at home thinking, please, please help us, because they need help. They've got off to a bad start. But there are signs that they're beginning to play well now. So don't count them out, but there's work needs doing and needs doing quickly in terms of getting wins. Finally, the other bye team were the Minnesota Vikings. The Lions lost, but the Packers and Bears won, meaning the NFC North has become close with all 4 teams in contentions coming out of week 6, which wasn't the case going into it. So that's made that a bit tougher for the Vikings overall. And similar comments apply to their position in the NFC wildcard race, where losses for the Eagles, Lions, Commanders, and 49ers helped them, but wins for the Seahawks, Rams, Bears, and Panthers did the opposite. So it wasn't a good week, bad week, if you like. Sums up that for the Vikings. But overall, they could have had a better bye week, is what I'm saying. So that's part 2 of this feature sorted. And next up, I'll be back with my preview of week 7. And I'll also do pieces coming up where I'll have a fresh look at the power rankings, MVP race, and offensive rookie of the year. Who's standing, how that pans out now, and a lot of that will depend on how long Emeka Ibuka's out. So look for those pieces coming up. See you soon.